Hello, welcome to my course on the formulation process. This is going to be a continuation of my Understanding Self-Defense Techniques videos. In that series, the main focus was using your self-defense techniques as a vehicle through which you can extract the concepts. And as we explored that idea, I shared with you a concept from Kempo called the three-phase concept, which is a great model that you can apply as you're learning and developing an understanding of your techniques and working to develop skill and ability to apply the lessons that you're learning from your techniques. And that model tells us we start our training, we start in the ideal phase, phase one, which is where it's a controlled environment and we're extracting the lessons and working to develop an understanding of the technique as is. And once we reach a certain level of understanding and are able to perform the technique skillfully, we of course have to move beyond that or we'll get stuck and we won't be progressing forward in our martial arts training. And so we move to phase two, which is where we ask a very critical question. We explore the variables that are at play and we ask, what if? And as you go through the what if phase, I gave you a couple places to get you started with looking for the answers. Now the first place, as you should recall, is to look within the technique itself, because very often people have the habit of jumping out of the technique or making changes, which is what we'll be exploring in this course. But if you start by looking within the technique, you'll hopefully develop a greater understanding of the capabilities of the technique. You know, sometimes you'll find the answer within the technique, and if you do, you've expanded your understanding of the possibilities. But that's not always the case, so I did give you another place to look, which is within another technique, because we learned that several techniques, oftentimes techniques serve as backups for one another, and that's another easy place to get you started. But things aren't always that simple, and that's where the formulation process comes in. Sometimes we have to make changes and reformulate the technique to arrive at a solution. As we get into the process, though, you'll discover that utilizing techniques as backups for one another is just a special case of using the formulation process. Now, the other thing that you'll discover along the way is that your techniques are very versatile. Now, in school, I studied physics, and through my study of physics, I always found it fascinating how much of physics is based on a few simple equations. And more than that, those simple equations can be rederived in multiple ways, and they serve multiple purposes. So it's much the same way that as you explore your techniques, you're going to find very often that advanced techniques are nothing more than alternate derivations of more basic fundamental techniques you learned at the beginning of your training. They're just reformulated versions of certain core self-defense techniques that you've learned, and that's a really important idea that we're going to be sharing with you. And that's the main purpose of this course. So now let's get into the formulation process. There's three major divisions that I teach to my students. If I give you a self-defense technique or sequence of motion, because keep in mind, this applies to any sequence of motion. You could pull a sequence out of forms, and I recommend you do that as well. Explore your forms. Apply this process to forms training or your sets. But in this series, we'll be exploring self-defense techniques. So say I give you a self-defense technique. There's certain things that you can do to make changes to that technique. One of the first things you could do, you could choose to add to the technique. You could add a move or series of moves. And you can do that in a few different ways. We have some specialized Kempo terminology I'm going to share with you. If you add to the beginning of a technique, we call that a prefix. So you can prefix your technique. And if you can prefix your technique, you can also suffix your technique, add to the end of your technique. Now, we can also insert within the middle of the technique, and we call it just that, an insert. So there's your subdivisions. This is your major division, these are your subdivisions. We'll explore several subdivisions as we go through this process as well. Now the second major division, I'm sure you've already figured it out. If we can add to a technique, we can also subtract from the technique, and we call that deleting. So you can delete a move or series of moves from your techniques and see what's left, see what you arrive at. Now, should you choose not to add anything to the technique or take anything away, you can still change what's there. You can still modify the existing sequence. And that's the third major division that we'll explore. And this particular piece of the process is one that has multiple subdivisions. So we're going to look at and explore that in detail later on. We're not going to get into the subdivisions just yet. We are going to start off our exploration of the formulation process. In school, it's pretty typical. We learn addition before we learn subtraction. But here we're going to start with deletion. We're going to look at removing movements from the technique because that's really simple, really easy to do. So this is where we're going to get started, and then we'll segue into a little addition and see what we can come up with. So why don't we get to work on exploring these first two pieces of the process. You know, before we look at any technique, one piece of advice I'll give you is if you have a sequence of motion, maybe it's a technique that just has 4 moves, and you look at the moves, you break it down by the numbers, 1, 2, 3, and 4. First thing you can do is you can ask yourself, what happens if I remove that first move? What am I left with? Might be a valuable technique, something you didn't think of before. And of course, go through and you can play that game with each other movement of the technique. And then, of course, that you're not limited to deleting one move at a time. You might delete move number 1 and move number 4. And so it's a long process. There's really, as we go through the whole formulation process, there's limitless possibilities of what you can do with it and how you can rearrange and alter things. Okay? All right, let's start with one of our most basic techniques. Let me have... You guys can all put your notebooks to the back. Let's get standing up. Okay. Let me have you and you come out here. We're going to start with our first front choke. You know the drill. I believe you're the one that did this last time, aren't you? So would you please choke her? Let's demonstrate the technique. So we're going to start off with, of course, she's going to crunch up to try to prevent the choke from happening. She's going to step back away from the choke. She's going to drive 2 fingers to prevent, to disengage the grab, because that's our primary concern when you're being choked. Stop the choke. Now, the next part, she deflects the arms, which is not, I want you to grab a hold again and grab tight. Don't choke her, but don't let go so easy. If she pokes and that didn't work, this is not, do the blocks. This is not, now hold on tighter. This might not work. It very well could work, but it's not a guarantee. There's a better alternative. We'll look at that later. So don't look at the double blocks as an escape. Instead, if she pokes, poke her again. That pushes her back. Now, if she were coming back in the grab, she deflects, and she can use this now to contour down the arms to find the target. And we'll just stop at the shutos. Now, what if we delete the first move? Well, really, we'll delete the first couple of moves, the crunch and the poke. What are we left with? We're left with a deflection. Now, so if she comes in to push, what can she do? Deflect. Now, she had forward energy, so when she deflects, go ahead, do the push again, she's going to be falling into our double shutos. And there's one of your very first applications. You can delete a move, and you arrive at a whole new technique, which really isn't that different. But the application, what it can be applied to, what that sequence of motion can be applied to, your understanding of the possibilities contained within the technique has now expanded. That's what this is about. Let's also, I'm going to give you a couple of techniques to work on because these are simple ideas. Several of you were here last time we went over this. Some of you, I'm not sure if you were. Let's start with a shoulder grab now. Why don't we turn this way, okay? And you're going to grab her by the shoulders. Let's move out of the way. So you're pulling her forward. Now she's going to make an axe handle and drive it forward and up and then down on the nose. That's one of our basic techniques as well. Okay, what about the situation? So in our first choke defense, choke her again, we said you're going to step back. Because as the grab is taking hold, or even as she's reaching in to grab you, your primary concern is don't get choked or don't get grabbed. So she moves away. What if it's too late? What if the person's grabbing and she's pulling her in now? Good, start pulling forward. Well, if she strikes low, that's not a guarantee that she's going to let go. Okay? She might, especially you strike to the groin. Typically the person's going to respond and let go. But what if they don't? So a better alternative here, if this is a choke, is to do what? Delete the first move. Jump to the second move, and now we have an escape, and then a strike. And now let's go back to the first technique, because we just were introduced to another method of escaping a choke. See, if she's choking her and she steps back, she does her poke, if she doesn't let go, well, you could try to do the blocks. It's not a guarantee. And if you're fighting a much bigger opponent, I can show you on Moses later, that really is not the most efficient means of eliminating that grab. But if from here, if the poke doesn't work, because maybe she's the type of person that, you know, on her weekends, she's bending metal bars on her throat. She's just that type of girl. So if she instead, after the poke, wants to escape the grab because the poke didn't work, what can she do? Straight up. And then you have a perfect escape. Okay? Let's get started with those two techniques, and then we'll come back and we'll introduce you to another technique in which we can delete a movement and arrive at a new solution to a problem. The next one that you should be familiar with, have Moses come out here, and why don't you come over on this side. He throws a straight punch, we step in, and we do our double punch. You already know, right? If he steps in and I mistime it, maybe, not that this couldn't work, it could, it's still an option, and this will certainly inflict injury, but the key of this technique is the timing. It's a critical part of the technique. When he's stepping in, I want him stepping into this punch. It's called borrowed force. But if I mistime it, maybe I'm a little gun shy, I move too far away, he has a chance to reestablish his base. Now he could try to kick. Go ahead, kick. Okay, and I might be punching him, and it's who gets to who first. He might try to come at me with that arm. Oh, I'm in danger. He might try to spin away and get me with this arm. So we can help negate that. We can apply a little bit of control on his dimensions if we delete the first move. So this technique is just 1, 2. Here's our positional check. If we delete the first move and we jump here, this is going to put a little more weight on his lead leg. It's going to make it hard for him to initiate an attack with his legs. It's going to go ahead spin. It's going to make it more difficult for him to spin. I have him in check for a moment. Now, he might still get me with this arm, but notice if I'm attacking, he's not going to be able to spin and get me with that arm, not too easily. Go ahead, spin again. This is going to be very difficult. But let's turn this way because I think it'll be easier to see this. Throw your punch. If I'm coming up here, come at me with that arm right now. This check, it's not going to guarantee that he can't get me with that arm. If you wanted to, you could get me, couldn't you? But what happened when I'm down here, get me with that arm. Don't really hit me. He has good reason to. I beat him up all the time. But if I delete that first move, look what happens. Come at me with that arm now. This arm now can deviate and it can become a block. It's also a natural check. This punch is going to help check and negate that arm. So deleting one move gives us additional possibilities with the technique. Okay? Just something that you should be aware of. Last time, he throws his punch. Whoop, I was too late, so I'm immediately checking this down. Remember, control the elbow, and there's my punch. Okay? Let's look at another technique. Speed bag. He throws a roundhouse punch. We block, and the block is designed. I'm striking the muscle right at the top of the forearm as a pressure point strike. So as he's punching in, I'm striking and trying to cripple at a downward angle. Followed by a back fist, thrust punch, back fist, thrust punch. Okay, so it's block, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's a very simple technique in design. It's a fast technique, and it's one we're going to look at as we get into the modification process because it's so simple. This technique can be modified in so many ways that you can derive from this base technique multiple advanced techniques that you learn. We have a lapel grab, we have a couple advanced punch techniques that are just derivations of this basic technique. But let's start with deletion. He throws his punch, I block, I hit 1, 2. Hey, maybe this has taken too much time. You could delete that movement. So you could go 1, 2, 3, and then skip the fourth movement and jump right to the fifth. And of course, we finish with a kick and then cross out. And you can practice it with that in place. But just a simple deletion. From this base technique, 1, 2, 3, 4, we can do just 3 strikes instead of 4. So block, 1, 2, 3. All right? Give that a try. You might like it. One last note on this technique. You may have noticed it already. Do a straight punch. We started with this a second ago. We worked 1 and then 2. Then we jumped. We deleted the first move, and we jumped here. Now I gave you speed bag, and I showed you throw the roundhouse punch. I showed you how we can block 1, 2, 3, 4, and kick. That's the basic version of the technique. We deleted a movement from it. Okay, 1, 2, 3. We deleted the second back fist, and we arrived at a new technique. I told you, with deletion, you have a sequence, 4 or 5 moves. I think if you count the kick, I think there's 6 moves in this technique. Start deleting different moves and see what you get. What happens if we delete 2? He throws this punch. What happens if we delete 2? So from, instead of the back fist, from 1, we jump to this. 1, 2. If he had done a straight punch, is that not a relative of what we were doing a second ago, of 3 combination? Is that not related? Straight punch again, please. Straight. Is that not related to this? It's a different variation. And when you learn the modification process, all you do is you change the thrust punch to a back punch. And that depends on if we alter targets. What's our target? We choose specific weapons for certain targets. But this technique, it's a powerful technique. The process that I'm giving you, I recommend you further explore this technique because there's a lot that you can arrive at. And with just one change, if we do get into the modification process, we change the block, we change the punch, we arrive at 3 combination. Okay? All right then, let's move into it. The next piece is addition. We did subtraction, we deleted moves. Next piece is addition. And you've already learned that. So we looked at the delayed sword, we looked at sword of destruction. When you make the 2 techniques work together, you can essentially prefix one or the other. If he starts with a punch with this hand, and I'm starting with sword of destruction, he throws another punch, I can then segue into delayed sword. That's just delayed sword with a prefix. And it's interchangeable. You can play back and forth with that. You can do the same thing with shielding hammer and 2 combination. Throw a roundhouse punch. He punches. Now wait a second. Shielding hammers 1, 2. Okay. Throw a punch with this hand. He throws a punch, 2 combination, 1, 2, or at least the variation we teach. Now if he throws a roundhouse punch, I start here, but now this hand comes in. Well, I've segued into my other technique. I've just prefixed it. This is a method of just analyzing motion, establishing connections, and dissecting your techniques. Do not, I can't emphasize this enough, do not get confused and think I'm saying, okay, I'm going to do, he's throwing a punch, shielding hammer. Now he throws, no, 2 combination. He throws another punch. Because I'm slow, I get stuck back and forth. Shielding hammer. You're not doing that. You're just, in a fight, it becomes spontaneous. You've learned the lessons. You've established the connections between your techniques, which is the key to mastery, understanding all the connections, going round and round and round until you thoroughly understand what's being taught and can adapt the lessons spontaneously. Okay, so we can prefix. We looked at shielding hammer. And I showed you that just off 1 punch, shielding hammer, 1, 2. Well, we have a suffix ending that we teach. There's a couple different endings that people do to this technique. If this is the base technique, this can be your suffix. You're just adding on to the end. Okay, what about inserting? I'm on guard. He throws the punch. Bop. Can't I insert within the technique? That's a very nice technique, by the way, to hit. That's going to take a lot of energy out of him. It's turning your offense and defense into one, offensive defense. He throws that punch, bam! I catch him, and now his mind is no longer in attack mode. It's switched gears. He's now in defense mode. So that's a beautiful tactic. All right, one more addition for you. Throw a straight punch. 1, See, we had this technique. Let's keep it the same way. We're not going to modify anything yet. But let's insert a chop. And this might come right up under his nose. Then I come back and I check and I catch him with a palm. Very fast technique. This is an incredibly fast technique. It's just designed for speed. Let's do it together. Come forward. Now we're on guard. We step in like this. 1, 2. Oh, I altered it to a palm. It's just habit because that's one of our fighting techniques. But 1, 2, 3. Again. You can see the speed in the technique. Moving in, you're projecting your body forward. We've added footwork now. Instead of just stepping, you're going to push drag, push off your back leg, and catch him with that first punch. From there, chop, check back down the arm, and punch. Okay? Here's a what if. What if we insert, say, we'll actually delete and insert at the same time. I'm going to reverse sides here. So if he did a roundhouse punch with this hand, just to get this started, I could start with a block, and I could hammer an elbow, and there's shielding hammer. What if we delete the block with this hand, and we insert, no, you're not going to punch. We insert a block with this hand, and we maintain essentially the pattern that's in shielding hammer. What do we arrive at? Well, let's adapt that now if he grabs my wrist. And I step and I turn. I might hammer or punch, okay? Drive him down, and then there's my elbow. Now it has to be modified a little, but look, we've taken a technique that we do off of a punch, and by using addition and deletion in conjunction with each other, we've arrived at another technique, a wrist grab. And a wrist grab is not typically a wrist grab. What I mean is this. Certainly if things are escalating, I might turn, and as I'm turning, he might grab me. That's one alternative, but we're probably not just standing here and he goes, hey, and grabs me by the wrist. It might be, throw a punch at me. It might be, like say he's doing, we're in tight and he catches me with an uppercut. I might end up grabbing a hold as a response to pain or just a situation. And now you have a grab defense. Okay? All right, there's another one for you. Go ahead.